Welcome to PBCJ's live coverage of the Senate. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. Before we begin, did you know that under the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, Constitutional Amendment Act 2011, you have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, belief and observation of political doctrines, the right to freedom of expression, the right to seek, receive, distribute or disseminate information, opinions and ideas through any media. In this sitting's agenda, we have the Domestic Violence Amendment Act 2023 to be tabled and taken. Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, Olivia Grange, had said the bill represents some critical areas that can immediately impact the scourge of domestic violence and assist victims in their search for security and redress to these acts. Regarding the amendments, Ms. Grange said Clause 2, which amends Section 3 of the Act, provides information on the persons who can make an application for a protection order under the legislation. They include the spouse or parent of an individual in respect of whom the conduct has been made or is likely to be made. A protection order is an order made by the court to prohibit an abuser from entering or staying in the home, workplace, place of education, or any particular place that could affect the victim. A protection order can also prevent an abuser from bothering a victim or a person he or she lives with, where the abuser watches or torments the home, workplace, or place of education, follows or lay-waits a victim or others in any place, makes persistent phone calls, uses abusive language, harasses or causes ill treatment, damages property that a victim or members of their household own, use, have access to, or is located at their home. You should know that domestic abuse, also called domestic violence or intimate partner violence, can be defined as a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner or a family member. The Domestic Violence Act, a law that provides enhanced protection to victims of physical and mental abuse from persons who reside with or are involved with in an intimate partner or familial relationship, includes abuse involving couples living together, married or unmarried, any children in the household, including children who are not the biological children of both or either spouse, any other members of the household, couples in a visiting relationship. Also on the agenda, a motion to approve Senate members for a joint select committee to review and report on the Domestic Violence Amendment Act 2023. If time allows, the State of the Nation debate will continue with a contribution by Senator Peter Bunting. It should be noted that the agenda can be adjusted, with items being added, removed, or replaced. If you are planning to attend a parliamentary session, here are some rules to keep in mind. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card from the office of the clerk. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during a suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. Now over to the proceedings.
To advise the Honorable Senate that on the 19th day of December 2023, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Domestic Violence Act was passed in the House of Representatives. Juliet Holness, MP.
I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
Thank you, Minister Johnson Smith.
A bill shortly entitled the Domestic Violence Amendment Act 2023 read the first time.
Mr. President.
Once you're engaging, you can just leave the mic on.
Even if that's open as
yes, well? Yes. In other words, during this process, you just leave the mic on.
Okay. All right, Mr. President, I ask for second reading of the bill.
Thank you.
And I beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will seek suspension of the standing orders to allow the Senate to take the bill through its concluding stages.
Very well, thank you. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally,
Pardon me. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move, be it resolved, that this Honorable Senate appoint a select committee comprising the following members: the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Senator Cavan Gale, Senator Abka Fitz-Henley, Senator Donna Scott Motley, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to consider and report its findings to this Honorable Senate on the act entitled the Domestic Violence Act. I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for suspension of the standing orders to allow me to take this motion.
Thank you, Minister. Questions?
So, if I may, because the custom is that you have more than one from the opposition side. So I was just wondering if there's been a change or if there's a reason why.
The Minister is saying that she had requested two.
Yes, Mr. President, and I sent two. If you would check your WhatsApp, either of government business.
So what's the other name that? What's the other name that you?
Senator Sophia Razorbean.
So, Minister, you could make the appropriate adjustment.
The difficulty, it is a custom and was intended. So I seem to have just missed that. And relied on what had been provided by right. So, Mr. President, if I might recommit the item and add the name Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns to the list of proposed members for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members would have heard the adjustment being made. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business. Minister.
Mr. President, I now move for suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Domestic Violence Amendment Act 2023 and to take it through all its concluding stages.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Minister, just indicate to me what your agenda is today.
Yes, Mr. President. The intention is to take this act through its concluding stages as just stated. The motion to establish the Joint Select Committee members from this chamber and to continue the State of the Nation debate with the contribution from Senator Peter Bunting.
Thank you very much. Senator Gale. Mr. Where is the other orderly here? So the one orderly working in the chamber? You need to just assist the minister with her chair.
It's fine. It's sorted now. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, as legislators, even as we prepare our hearts and minds to celebrate this season of joy and peace, we remain ever aware of the circumstances which may cause some of our citizens, some Jamaican citizens, to not be able to share in the good cheer of the season. And these are the persons who concern us today victims of domestic abuse, Mr. President. So we are called on within this Senate to wrestle again with one of our greatest social challenges. As set out in the last Women's Health Survey, Mr. President, I believe it was conducted in 2016, it reported that 4 in 10 women, Mr. President, experience some form of intimate partner violence. And I know we have more statistics that support the type of violence and its extent across the island. We see reported in the headlines the ultimate result of what first often manifests itself as intimate partner violence. And that is, of course, some of the most barbaric murders of women and children by their intimate partners, in many cases, their spouses. Mr. President, the Domestic Violence Act was passed in 1995, came into effect in 96, and was again amended in 2004. Those amendments came into effect in 2005. And the Act, when it was passed, sought to provide some immediate measures for the protection of persons suffering from domestic violence. Mr. President, it sought to address circumstances where they are able to demonstrate that some physical or mental injury has been caused and that they are likely to suffer same once more. Mr. President, 1995 is several decades ago, and even 2005 makes this act of some vintage in terms of the developments that we have had as a society. And the deficiencies of that bill have been made clear and more clear as we have continued to discuss these issues. Mr. President, the Act provides for protection orders, which essentially relate to actions that the respondent, that is the person who is accused of domestic violence, protection orders relate to actions that that the court will prevent them or prohibit them from doing. And occupation orders, again, provided for under the Act, as the language indicates, relate to the victim being able to exclude the respondent from the marital home or the place in which they reside together. Mr. President, the provisions for breach, $10,000, $10,000, and up to 6 months, or both, but clearly woefully inadequate. Mr. President, the issue goes beyond, and the actions which are being taken go beyond legislation. The Act is long overdue for review. This was acknowledged by the Joint Select Committee convened in 2015 and again in 2016, the report of which was passed by this Senate in 2020. The Joint Select Committee, of course, had a heavy load of work, Mr. President. It reviewed the Sexual Offences Act, the Offences Against the Persons Act, Child Care and Protection Act, and this Domestic Violence Act. And where it landed, Mr. President, was that the scope of amendments required for the DVA were so extensive that a new Joint Select Committee was proposed at that time. So as we have just agreed, and as has been established in that other place, a Joint Select Committee will sit to review this act in its entirety. But there are some things which were recommended by the Joint Select Committee at that time, which can be taken immediately and which can have immediate effect. And the Ministry of Culture, Entertainment and Sports has brought a bill to make those changes, which are before us today. Before I get to those changes, Mr. President, I just want to place them in the context of work which the government is undertaking to address this broader issue. Because certainly the law alone and the scope of this amendment alone will not suffice. So, Mr. President, the government has taken to establishing shelters. You might recall, Mr. President, that it was in 1984 that the first shelter in Jamaica was established by Women Incorporated with the support of the government. They continue to get an annual subvention, but it is run by an NGO, and Mr. President, their facilities regrettably are not sized to allow for children, and therefore it has long had challenges in accommodating the number of persons who need the type of help they offer. Under the leadership of Minister Grange, 3 properties were purchased by the government to establish shelters. One is fully functioning in the east. It has counseling facilities. It allows for children. It allows for transitional training in terms of providing women who are victims with training that will allow them to provide for themselves and their families in other circumstances once they are able to leave the home. It is indeed a full-service shelter. The second shelter, Mr. President, is also up and running, and that is in a separate county. Mr. President, that location, of course, was officially opened in December 2021, and it too is a full-service center. Mr. President, to date, the centers have provided 79 clients with the type of support that I have provided, 36 women and 43 children, and the age range has spanned from 18 to 57 years. Shelter 3 is currently being renovated and fitted to provide, again, for the services which I have just given. But it's really important that, as we have recognized the importance of empowering women to report, and as we work here today to provide for stronger penalties in the circumstances where they do report, we have to recognize the importance of providing somewhere for them to go. And the government has therefore been active in doing what has been undone, what has been left undone for so many decades, Mr. President, by providing the shelters which now supplement the one NGO running shelter. Mr. President, there has been the establishment of 10 domestic violence intervention centers at police stations in 8 parishes across Jamaica. Centers are to be established in all parishes, and we know that 2 are currently in the KSA area, where there is a particularly high incidence of domestic violence reports. Mr. President, there's been special training of the police force, and there have been more than 300 supervisors that have been trained since 2020 in this area. A national coordination unit has been established within the Community Safety and Security Branch that will capture data and will interface with external partners to provide for more extensive planning and more effective planning and management of the issue of domestic violence. Counseling and skills training have been provided to police and to volunteers, and they have also been provided to victims, Mr. President. Legal support has been provided, emergency response. There are families that have had to be moved out in the dead of night to escape sure and certain death, Mr. President. And they have been housed in these shelters that have been provided by the government. Mr. President, there has also been training for parents how to address these matters when they arise in the household, how to manage children's ability to cope with same. We've collaborated with partners, and in particular the European Union and the UNFPA, who have supported our efforts to eliminate gender-based violence and to deal with the necessary support to victims. And in fact, the EU has been particularly helpful in the renovation of the shelters and the provision of facilities there. Mr. President, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, must also be commended for establishing its gender-based violence helpline Mr. President, they have they launched these helplines together with the sexual harassment investigation units during Jamaica's commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women last month. And the helpline provides support to victims, survivors, and witnesses. And help is provided 24 hours per day by WhatsApp. There's a WhatsApp line for men and a WhatsApp line for women. And there's also a toll-free line for both, Mr. President, which can be contacted at 1-888-NO-ABUSE. 1-888-NO-ABUSE, Mr. President. In January of next year, the government will also be providing resources to double the number of gender-based violence helpline specialists so that the support that is provided through those WhatsApp and call lines is that much greater. Mr. President, without going too deeply into the details, Mr. President, I just want to share some figures as I had referred to earlier. This is coming out of the Gender-Based Violence Helpline Unit, which commenced its operation in September, end of September, but were formally launched in November. Since launch, the unit has dealt with more than 7,400 cases, 5,227 cases from females, and 2,239 from males. What's even more concerning, Mr. President, is that the Women's Health Survey had reported that 63% of women who had recently faced physical or sexual partner violence, 63% did not seek any form of help. 63%, Mr. President. And the main factors for underreporting for men is stigma and lack of support, but for women, fear, largely fear, Mr. President. They have not felt that they can speak out, that they can report, they can even speak to family or friends or neighbors, but worse, they have feared reporting to authorities. And this is why the public education campaign and the establishment of the helplines are so very important. Because just the ability to speak to someone and make that initial anonymous engagement, to be guided through the feelings of fear and encouragement to take the next step, that's absolutely critical, Mr. President. And then the ability to move to somewhere, that is also a necessary element where that is required. And Mr. President, the fact is that the approach, or rather the reticence of victims in coming forward is further constrained by what is a perceived lack of consequence in the law. So if it is that an order is granted, if you go through all of the difficulty of getting an order granted, but then it's only $10,000 if it's breached, then the question is, from a victim, do I go through that very difficult process and then there's no protection? I have no protection after if my spouse or my partner is further enraged by my having made this approach. So they just don't go, Mr. President. They don't go to the courts. They don't seek that type of help. And this is why, Mr. President, the amendments which we have before us today, which admittedly fall far short of what is absolutely required, which is a full repeal and replacement of the Domestic Violence Act. It requires a definition, Mr. President, as the Joint Select Committee proposed. It must go beyond a demonstration of physical violence which causes physical and mental injury. It must go beyond, Mr. President, into the various ways that direct control and abuse is exercised in households, Mr. President. And it must be that the general mechanism and framework is one which is fit for a modern society where the issue is recognized as not, quote unquote, just man and woman business, private business, that it is a part of the public health crisis in violence which we experience as a society, because it creates that cycle of violence where children witness violence or experience violence. They are more likely to become perpetrators of violence when they become adults. They live what they see as children and repeat the behavior as adults if it is that there is no intervention, Mr. President. And if it is that a society does not recognize that the framework that provides for that intervention is insufficient and does not go forward to do so, then we will be continuing the cycle without addressing its root causes. So, Mr. President, there's a clear case to be made for the increase in penalties that have been provided. And having also discussed the issue of fear earlier, there's a clear case to be made for an expansion in the number and categories of persons who can make a report. So that is also provided here. The scope of protection orders and the ability of the court to grant orders which go beyond protection or occupation orders, that is the provision of a court to make such order as it sees fit, is also an important expansion to be brought before this chamber. Mr. President, so briefly, Clause 1 states that the amendments shall be read and construed as one with the Domestic Violence Act and all amendments thereto, and that it will come into operation on a day to be appointed by the minister by notice published in the Gazette. And as was explained in that other place, an appointed day notice is being used to ensure that the administrative processes are put in place to allow for when the effective date comes, then all should be in place for clarity in terms of the operation of the Act and the law which the court should be relying on. Mr. President, Clause 2.1 seeks to amend Section 3 of the Act. And this is the clause, Mr. President, that expands the scope of solutions available to a judge hearing the matter, because it provides that the protection or occupation order can be granted, and I quote, in accordance with this Act. And it also provides for any other order that the court considers just in the circumstances of the case. And this is intended to take into consideration the innumerable types of circumstances that can exist in a domestic violence case and grants, therefore, wide discretion. Mr. President, Clause 2.2a also amends Section 3 of the Principal Act, this time by deleting subsection 2 and replacing it with a new subsection 2, which provides for the expanded category of persons who may now apply for an order. And, Mr. President, as indicated earlier, this is particularly important. And in respect of children, I just want to make clear that one of the recommendations which allows for the children's advocate to apply where alleged conduct is threatened against a child, that is one of the changes that has been brought here, which again allows for the children's advocate, which has overarching oversight of the welfare of children, to be able to take action in respect of cases which come to her attention and which previously, or her office's attention, which previously they would have been, powerless to intervene. Mr. President, Clause 2.2b continues with the amendment of Section 3, but this time by deleting and substituting a new subsection 4. And this really provides, guides the court in respect of granting leave to apply, because there is in respect of the list of persons who can apply, the court can actually hear an application from people who are not, for a person who is not a member of the household, Mr. President. So where it is that someone knows and they are in sufficient position to provide the information that is required to make a proper report to the authorities or to apply to the court, that they can do so with the leave of the court. So this amendment here guides the court on what to consider in granting that leave. And it also, Mr. President, 2.2c also inserts a new subsection 5, which allows the minister to amend the list of persons who may apply for the protection order by order subject to affirmative resolution. Mr. President, Clause 3 seeks to amend Section 4 by deleting subsection 1 and replacing it with provisions to prohibit certain actions that may affect victims. More particularly, to use the language I've just been, it expands the scope of the protection order, Mr. President. And it takes into consideration the different ways in which perpetrators of violence seek to do damage to the life and property of their victims. Mr. President, the subsection now allows for the prohibition of the respondent from entering or remaining in the household of any prescribed person, entering or remaining in any areas specified in the protection area. Mr. President, it excludes or prohibits harassing the prescribed person, and here it is that the ordinary meaning of harassment may be used in its broadest terms in the context of domestic violence. Mr. President, the order can prevent the person from entering or remaining in any particular place. So where it is that the court it takes notice that the victim is vulnerable in any particular place or environment, the order can exclude the respondent from being present in that place. Mr. President, so of course that could include a workplace, it could include a school, it could include a place that the person frequents and is therefore known to be vulnerable. Mr. President, it prevents the damaging of property owned by and the return of property taken, the dealing with, in fact, taking possession or converting. So taking away the car so that the victim is now unable to operate or to take the children to school, etc. It allows for orders which provide for same. Mr. President, it goes further to compel, to provide the court with the authority to compel the respondent to return property, whether it is jointly or separately owned by the prescribed person. It may also require the respondent to hand over to the police any gun or prohibited weapon in the respondent's possession or control, whether or not it has been used in the circumstances. So you don't have to prove that you were threatened with a particular gun for the gun to be taken. It's just sufficient that the respondent has a gun, because clearly the fact that they have used it or not does not determine whether they may use it in the future. And this, I think, is particularly important, Mr. President, as we look at the broad context within which murders take place in intimate partner violence. And it has been in circumstances where one partner possesses a gun, and but of course, now there is specific reference. Victims and potential victims can know that this is an order they can seek from the court if they are in fear, and it is something, an order which the court will grant. Mr. President, Clause 4 amends subsection 1 of Section 5 to increase the penalties, as we had discussed earlier. So the fine for breach of the order, Mr. President, moves from $10,000 up to $10,000 to up to $1 million. And the alternative of incarceration, of course, moves from up to 6 months to up to 1 year. And the option of both being imposed by the court remains. And furthermore, the bill allows for a new subsection 1A, which allows the minister to amend the monetary penalties subject to affirmative resolution. Mr. President, the bill seeks to afford greater protection for victims suffering from this scourge. I am sure that we are all agreed in here that we wish that today we were actually reviewing the full repeal and replace, because so much is required, and this is such an important area. But we are where we are. I am confident that the minister, having pressed forward, that we are all here today, as a matter of fact, notwithstanding the previous intention to having taken the recess last week, that we are here because we believe this is an important bill with important changes that can have direct impact on the lives of people over a season which is known to be deeply emotional for many families, Mr. President. So in this context, as we reaffirm our commitment to creating a society where each and every Jamaican can live a life free from fear and free from violence, I invite the support of both sides of this chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. President.
Senator Fraser-Bills.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me just start off by indicating to the Minister that she has the support of this side. In fact, it's because we are minded to support the bill why we're out in our numbers today. So, Minister, notwithstanding our considered comments that we will share with you today, I do hope that you accept that it is done in the spirit of what we want to see on this side as a holistic approach and not a piecemeal approach to any form of legislation, but in particular this piece of legislation. So, Mr. President, we support this bill. We support this bill. And with your leave, I shall want to make a few comments. Minister, I will say that we on this side are most disappointed that what is coming to us now is a 3-page document after 5 years. And I say that because I understand the government's legislative agenda, and I understand and we appreciate the work that Minister Grange has been doing over time. But at the same time, the very way in which we were able to have meetings at the Minister of Justice office to discuss the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Act, the Child Care and Protection Act in 2016-2017, I believe that the same energy and the same focus ought to have been applied to give a complete overhaul of the Domestic Violence Act. You said it yourself, Minister. That's a 1995 act. Decades have passed. Forms and types of violence have changed significantly. And we're still left to deal with a legislation that is not reflective of the time. So we would have wanted a better approach. And it does not appease us on this side. And when I speak on behalf of all my colleagues on this side, that a Joint Select Committee has been named, because that Joint Select Committee could have been named 5 years ago, could have deliberated, could have reviewed the Domestic Violence Act. And today, we would have been here to discuss a more full, detailed, and modern piece of legislation. And whereas, you know what they say about empty barrels? And whereas we appreciate the amendments that are being tabled today and debated, we believe that much more could have been done in the 5 years. And I am hoping that having called us back and having set up the Joint Select Committee, that we will hear in very short order the convening of those meetings, because we have agreed that there are critical issues to be addressed that have not been addressed with these proposals. So, Minister, I'm quite sure that you will appreciate the sentiment on this side that what we want is what you want, which is the best bill. And perhaps to the newest senator, he can't fully understand, but you can understand, because a number of years ago, you sat right here, where Senator Scott Motley is sitting, and you're very moved when you moved the motion. It's right here. When you moved that motion that enjoyed bipartisan support, notwithstanding the challenges which happen sometimes. But it was your recommendation, Minister, that compelled us to review those legislation and this legislation. So I'm quite sure you, if nobody else understands, you understand the passion and the need and the urgency with which the Domestic Violence Act should be amended. That being said, I echoed what I said earlier, that we are in full support of the amendments here today, although we would have wanted to have a different type of debate. Minister, you will permit me to just share a few observations from the very short bill. And I want to start at page 2, which is the amendment to section 3. So it is subsection 2A. And it says, an application for an order referred in subsection 1 may be made by the spouse or parent who is a prescribed person in respect of whom the alleged conduct has been or is likely to be engaged. The comment I have, and you can just perhaps provide some guidance, is when one looks at the Principal Act, it does give a definition of the prescribed person. And consequent upon that definition, I wondered whether the word in here, in fact, it seems a little awkward. The word in here is a little awkward, so I'm not quite sure, and I'm not a draftsman. But for a trained person, it's a little awkward for me, so I can imagine maybe awkward for those who are not so trained. And I wondered whether it would make better reading to say, may be made by the prescribed person in respect of whom. So that is something I'm putting out for your team to consider. At 2A, Roman numeral 3, a dependent who is not mentally disabled. I know that word is coming directly from the Principal Act. I wondered, and Senator Morris is here, if there's a more forensic term, more sophisticated term that can be used. My colleagues were saying mentally disabled, not mentally disabled. So I know we are overhauling the bill in short time, but I just wondered, as we are now doing this, if it is something that we can consider. Well, I'm just putting it out, and I can see that there is consensus on both sides about that phrase there. To continue, paragraph 3, section 4. And Mr. President, I'm going to seek some protection from a very unlikely person, AKA Senator Ransford Braham. It's very unlikely, but I know he's been having, he's been indulging in some of the Christmas festivities, so that perhaps explains why he's disturbing me today. But Senator Braham, paragraph 3, section 4, and this is where I have my main concern, Minister. Yes. So we're amending section 4. And in the bill, it says that section 4 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting subsection 1. Right, so we're deleting subsection 1 and substituting thereof the following. Now, section 1, and for the most part, A is the same, A1, A2, they continue. And then we come to A3, and it says harassing the prescribed person. The problem I have is that the Principal Act, in my mind, goes further than the bill. Because in the Principal Act, Senator Braham, it lists not exhaustively, but it lists certain considerations. And what I found exciting was a provision at 4.1e, because it says from molesting a prescribed person, and then it lists the instances. But at the bill, that section is taken out completely, and an insertion is made using the phrase harassing the prescribed person. Now, I am not aware, and I can be corrected, of the term harassment or harassing used in any legislation, but specific to the Domestic Violence Act, I don't know what it means, because there's no definition provided within the bill for the term harassment. So my interpretation, therefore, is that harassing the prescribed person can mean anything. Yes, but what does that mean? Whereas it says here that for molesting a prescribed person, and it lists the circumstances. It lists the circumstances under which a person can apply for a protection order. So my conclusion, therefore, is that the Act provides a wider basis than the bill. Consequent on that, I am proposing that perhaps we need to relook what is here. The other thing as well is from the Joint Select Committee, they listed a myriad of instances which I'm not seeing here, and Minister spoke to them in her presentation. We're talking about financial abuse, mental abuse. Those are instances which have not been covered here, but I am hopeful that as we amend the Principal Act, that these are things that we will consider. Notwithstanding that, I believe that something else has to be done to Section 4, subsection 1, to make it comparable or better than what is in the Principal Act. At minimum, there should be a definition of harassment. That being said, we are in agreement with the bill. I have no further comments, more than to say that we wait anxiously for the commencement of the committee, Joint Select Committee, to review the sexual harassment bill in total. And with that said, Mr. President, the domestic violence bill in total, I was thinking about harassment. And with that being said, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Sapphire Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to make a few points of contribution to this very significant piece of legislation yet again. Mr. President, I am very happy to see that we are here continuing with the effort to bring hope to a very significant part of our population. And the persons who are vulnerable to domestic violence are, of course, clearly part of that very significant vulnerability. I will start by just reviewing domestic. We use it so very often. But the meaning of domestic, relating to the running of a home or to family relations, simply put. And I took it there for us to be reminded of how impacting what we're dealing with here really is to our society and to the Jamaican culture. You know, we speak a lot, and a lot of persons make reference to victims of domestic violence, especially women, who relate that if the person don't love them, if they don't hit them, they don't love them. And it had me thinking as to what is the origins of such a mindset. And it goes back to, again, our generationality, I think. We are a post-colonial society in which we were reprogrammed, I think, to recognize interpersonal relationships, even when supposedly supposed to be reflections of love. It was done in very aggressive and violent ways. And so we are now seeing the manifestations of that within our families and within our society. And so, you know, the overarching speech of self-love and seeking to ensure core family values is always at the basis of our solutions, I think. And I think, Mr. President, more and more we are becoming very aware of the importance of our mental health focus in governance. I raised recently, Mr. President, and brought to the attention of the country, I hope, a particular observation with respect to domestic violence. And I can speak on this ad nauseum because it's my occupation, or part of my occupation. And I brought attention to the postpartum period after a woman gives birth. And I extrapolated it to say that, you know, the value of our women begins with appreciating that we are the propagators of our population and on our humanity. 1 week after that, it was in the papers where a baby was tossed, I think, from a 3rd floor. I think it was that. I don't remember. I can't read the specifics sometimes because it's too jarring. That very week, I was actually on call for the emergency room at UE. And we had a circumstance of a 17-year-old who was pregnant and basically homicidal towards her infant. And she was now 6 months postpartum. I bring it here, Mr. President, because as we are propagating and seeking to adjust our legislation, we have to see where the vulnerabilities really are. As we go into another joint select, and I'm grateful to have served on the first joint select, it was some very heavy work, we have to consider how to really impact the propagation of violence in our society. And as this act describes, it's about the family and the basic unit of such. And so, Mr. President, as we celebrate this advancement, I am imploring that we put the measures in place, especially around the postpartum period and the support for our women and our fathers during that time, because it is not just the women who are affected. As I said, I could go ad nauseum and present situations. That baby that I told you about, her mother was infanticidal towards her. It was the father who brought the mother in. And he himself was being abused physically. And so, Mr. President, I just wanted to make sure that I made that contribution as we consider domestic violence in our society. And recognize, too, the new buzzword around abuse and trauma, or buzz phrase, I should say, is the adverse childhood experiences. And in my professional capacity, I recognize that that postpartum period is possibly the first impact of the ACEs. That's where the trauma starts. And that's where the therapy needs to start. Mr. President, I also would like to, of course, address certain concerns specific in the bill. Senator Fraser-Binns, if you look at my copy that I wrote up and I went across, we have the same, almost the exact same points that I wanted to raise concern around. And perhaps it's because we're mothers alike and mothers of boys. But yes, I too had the concern regarding in a different way, in part 2A, spouse or parent, and not just leaving it at prescribed persons, because I think that that is more expansive. And that was also something that I raised at that point. I also raised 2A3, a dependent who is mentally disabled, and likewise, similar reference to 2B4, no, 2.4a, a dependent who does not have a physical or mental disability. Senator Braham, the clarity around this is the vernacular. As we deal with stigma and discrimination in mental health, it's one of the reasons a lot of persons shy away from getting the help that they need a lot of times. When you say a person is mentally disabled or has a physical or mental disability, the humanitarian and the way that we are seeking to see changes in how persons such as that are referred to is a person diagnosed with a mental disorder, because a mental disorder is not the person in their entirety. And a diagnosis is simply that. Just like how you might be diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes, you could be diagnosed with a mental disorder. So the whole effort in terms of the review of the nomenclature and the wording and the labels that we associate goes a far way in reducing the stigma and discrimination attached to persons who may be dealing with these issues. So we move away from labeling the individual as an illness and recognizing them as being diagnosed with something like anybody else can be. And so it is imperative. I also had concerns around 3A3, just where I pointed it out, as Senator Fraser-Binns brought, in terms of harassing the prescribed persons. But in our opening, Leader referred to the broadest terms, referred to harassing as being taken in its broadest terms. I did not get a chance to reflect on the parent bill, but in my mind, I am hoping that that includes communication in person or online, virtually, in its broadest sense. So I too share that concern. And so, Mr. President, those were, I think, issues that, when weighed against the urgency of us addressing domestic violence and the amendments that this brings, I think those are issues that we can note and refer to Hansard when we go to the Joint Select Committee. Because I don't think it is weighted enough to delay, especially over this Yuletide season, an act that could protect persons who are especially vulnerable at this time. Mr. President, I will just reflect on one or two points regarding, and I hope the focus, one of the main areas of contention in the last Joint Select Committee, and I wouldn't say contention, but great discourse. And it is something that I have a personal passion about. And again, something that came to my awareness in another space is the age of consent and the discrepancies with the age of consent. I have friends who are in the legal field, quite a few. And in the last probably 5-6 months, I have had requests and just persons venting that they're dealing with a situation where, and this actually happened to the household helper of someone that I know, where her 17-year-old daughter was missing. She comes from a rural community. Missing person report, everything. One of those pictures that you see, that. And apparently what is happening is that these young ladies are going into sexual relationships in hotels, etc., etc. And when confronted by their parents or found by their parents, the rhetoric is bold and in your face. You can't say nothing because me have age of consent. Bold and in the face. And so, you know, Mr. President, I hope, and I raised it at the last joint select, I hope that we recognize that there's a great discrepancy and a great vulnerability for our children, anyone under 18. And I have said it before, and I will keep my message on point. The protection of our children should be paramount in everything we do. And to say a child is able to go, to go and vote, not able to get a driver's license, but is able to add another child to this space and deal with the consequences of uninformed sexual engagement is a great incongruency in the effort to protect our children and to improve our society. And so, Mr. President, as I said, I stand to support, of course, this piece of legislation. And I'm glad to hear that financial and psychological abuse, and we have had amendments to address such, but I think we need to even pay greater attention to the subtleties of how those can occur. Because I've heard of some circumstances that are very tricky. And the last thing that I would suggest, in terms of public education, but also a lifeline, just as we have helplines being established for domestic violence, for suicide, etc. Can we have a helpline, possibly, that is especially preventative in its effort? A parenting helpline. A helpline for especially new parents or women in pregnancy, antenatal spaces. I spoke of the use of e-communication to create a network of support for our women and our young fathers, especially during the postpartum period. And so, Mr. President, I hope that along with public education, we may see a move for a helpful, preventative approach to dealing with our especially vulnerable population at that time. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Sapphire Longmore. Senator Dr. Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I don't need the... thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to this debate. And, you know, the opposition is extremely committed to the legislative process. And that is why we are here today to participate in this debate. Notwithstanding, Mr. President, I want to express concern because, you know, this is an important piece of legislation, and it is being debated on the cusp of the Christmas season. And what I know of the legislative process is that if any amendments are to be taken here today, it would have to go back to the House of Representatives for adoption, and I get the feeling, based on the fact that we were called to sit today, that there is an urgency on the part of the government to get this piece of legislation up and running. And so I don't know, Mr. President, irrespective of concerns that might be put forward an amendment, whether or not those amendments will be accepted. But we still will be putting forward our concerns as it relates to the piece of the legislation. It's just the reality of the legislative process that I am highlighting because, you know, of the concerns that Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns have made, and myself, and even Senator Lawmore have made such observations as well. Mr. President, I also want to point out the absolute importance of such a legislation, because when one looks at the data in terms of murders, and you look at the literature surrounding domestic violence, you realize that there's an evolutionary process that takes place. It starts out with mild abuse, then it gravitates into physical violence, and then it morphs into the unfortunate situation of murders. And based on data that I've seen from research, up to 33 or a third of the domestic murder, the violence that are murders rather, that are committed, domestic violence is a major contributing factor. And I even heard the Minister of National Security speaking to it. But I say, mention it, Mr. President, because, you know, from as far back as 2019, I've been pointing out that in order to curb the level of domestic violence and murders in our society, we need to build out an army of social workers to assist in containing that problem. Police are not social workers. They are not trained to deal with that sort of thing. And I have heard on a number of occasions where police go into communities because they have reports of violence taking place between family members. And they go and they talk to them. And you would hear the family members say, the police then come and them talk to them. But it's a waste of time because them left them and they're gone because the police can't do nothing about it. We need to adopt a totally different approach in terms of dealing with the whole situation of domestic violence. And this is a step in the right direction. But unless we build out a professional cadre to deal with some of the systemic problems in communities where domestic violence are concerned, we're not going to be able to do it, to solve it, you know. And if we had started from 2019 when I made the observation based on a researched position, based on experiential knowledge coming out of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, where I was responsible for the PATH program for 7 years, and having access to the data, if we had started training social workers from then, or even from before, yeah, But Senator Webby, in his presentation, started in 2018, so I'm starting at 2019. And it was very convenient for him. So I mentioned 2019, Mr. President, because it was the year when the first state of emergency was declared to deal with the current crime wave. But I tell you, Mr. President, you know, the point that I'm making is that there is a need for us to build out that professional cadre to deal with the whole situation of domestic violence. And then, Mr. President, finally I want to point out the points raised first by Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, supported by Senator Longmore, and supported by me in terms of the reference, the nomenclature of mentally disabled, and then references to physical and mentally disabled. You see, what is happening, Minister, is that our legislative process and our the formation of our legislation have been anchored under what we call a medical model of disability, which predates the current human rights model approach to disability. Pardon me? Yes, that's what I'm pointing to. The medical model is antiquated because they perceive persons with disabilities in a negative light. They see these individuals as having impairments, and the impairment must be fixed by the medical practitioner, and if it is not fixed, then the person with disability is not able to participate effectively in society.
Sorry, Senator.
No, but you have to move the point of order respectfully.
Sorry, Senator Morris. 1 minute. Let me hear what this is.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted the point of order being, I think, misrepresentation of the facts that is being conveyed. I think
you are suggesting that you want the Speaker to yield so you can clarify a matter.
Yes, Chair. Thank you for the guidance. President,
1 minute.
thank you for the guidance.
Are you prepared to yield, Senator Morris? Apparently, the Speaker wants to clarify something. No, but I never said it's a point of order. I said, who was that mumbling under his breath? Senator Bunting.
Mr. President,
I pointed out 1 minute.
I
pointed out to Senator Longmore that it's not a point of order. I've asked Senator Morris if he wishes to yield. You don't wish to yield?
No, Mr. President.
No problem. Continue. No problem.
You know, I'm
Senator Morris, continue.
Yes, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, you know, the point is that we are operating under a human rights approach which views disability in a totally different light currently, and that has to be reflected in the legislation that we formulate. If you look at Article 4.1 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and 4.2 that we are signatories to, requires that we abolish any sort of negative references in laws as it relates to persons with disabilities. And I get the feeling that in the second reference in this piece of legislation that deals with the physical disabled and mentally disabled, that it is talking about, it is a generic term that has been used previously in referencing persons with disabilities. Because I would ask, why not somebody who is blind, a person who is blind? Why not a person who has an intellectual disability? Why not a person who has a learning disability? These are categories of disability. And what you're seeing here in terms of the reference to physical and mental are specific categories of persons with disabilities. And, you know, I'm a bit concerned because I'm also confused as to what the section is trying to achieve. And Minister, I would be most grateful if I could get some clarity there. And the final observation here is that when you make reference to and you exclude persons who are categorized as mentally disabled, we must also remember that we are operating in an era where there is a sophistication in terms of medical treatment where mental illness is concerned. And so a person can be diagnosed with a mental illness, gets treated, and is able to function effectively in society. Now, if you know how our society operates, Floyd Morris is diagnosed with a mental illness. I am labeled, I am labeled as being mentally ill. And even though I get medical treatment from Senator Longmore, and my situation is, she's a very good psychiatrist. She's a very good psychiatrist. So my situation is normalized, and I am functioning all right in my society. And then this law, this piece of legislation, based on how it is worded and structured, would exclude me from the process because I have been there, and I don't think it is fair. And in any law that we pass in this parliament, fairness must be a part of its foundation. And I think that we need to have a relook at it in terms of how it is structured. And as I said, I would like to get some clarity as to the reference in the section that deal with the, those who does not have a physical or mental disability. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Just waiting for the return of the minister. No court today, Senator Sinclair.
Well, I don't know. It is taking place, President. But we'll have to look on some of those buildings because of the disability that I'm experiencing.
Yeah. I noticed that you have become an advocate for the disabled recently. You never have nothing to say before.
Very, very much so, sir.
He needs to apply for disabled benefits at the NIS.
Senator Morris is asking if you don't apply for the disabled benefit down at NIS.
Is that some advice that he's giving me?
Apparently. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I assume an upright carriage. So did I. Mr. President, I rise to make a few closing comments to bring this debate to its conclusion today before moving to committee. a matter of fact, I may not need this, you know. Recognizing and welcoming the support of the opposition on this matter, on this bill that's before us. And indeed, sharing in the sentiment of frustration and the fact that, or rather the belief, that there should be a fuller bill before us today. And I know Senator Fraser-Binns, when she mentions the Joint Select Committee and the motion that I moved, I mean, the motion was in 2013. So literally, I am the last person who would be satisfied with where we are today, and also the last person who would believe that there shouldn't be more that we could do. But I'm also the last person who would delay the changes that are before us today, because getting this done to provide the protection that it does provide is better than not providing anything further at this time. And I think so we recognize that we don't have a perfect situation before us, Mr. President, but we recognize that the ministry has been working hard, and I'm just sharing some examples of the public education campaign, which features both men and women in a visual sense, and provides the WhatsApp numbers for both women and men, as well as the toll-free number, to ensure that this sentiment that there's no excuse for abuse, that you're not alone, that help is available, that there is someone you can talk to, there is a way to reach out. And this is being done in conjunction with the European Union, as well as the advertising agencies. Oh, it's only on one. Perhaps if the technical persons are hearing, it's only being shown on one screen? Really? Oh, because I'm always facing here, I'm not aware. I'm so sorry, and it is, and they're impactful. The images are, I believe, appropriate. If you could just shift that, I was going to say, if you could shift that body part known as the neck. It's to be found between the head and the shoulders. And it's really good at changing direction. But it does speak to, the ability to reach out to a network of support, and does provide for messages of empowerment as well. And again, the persons on the other line are trained to deal with issues, to give advice, to connect victims or potential victims, persons in fear, with a network of support. It does speak to raise the issue that violence against women and girls is something as a society that we need to speak out against, and that we do, in fact, speak out against. And it speaks personally to people. It says that, it tells them that they are more than a victim of abuse, that they're a survivor, and the fact that they have survived means that there is more that can be done, and that they have a life after abuse, Mr. President. And I think there are many, Mr. President, the bill that's before us doesn't do all that it should, but certainly where victims are able to know that these protection orders will be enforced, that police have been trained, that judges are being sensitized, that domestic violence intervention centers are available within the police stations, that when you're making a report, you're not in a situation where your whole of your business is out right in the street as the policeman shout out to you, "What you say again? Him lick you?" No. They're being trained to deal with things sensitively, in privacy, and in a way that allows persons who have been the subject of violence to report in dignity. In dignity, Mr. President. It's so important. To know that someone cares is important, and to know that you'll be taken seriously is important as well. So this is this work is underway, and I think it is a very good thing to recognize that there's a supporting framework around the government's activities. Nobody is trying to say, once this bill passes, everything will be solved. There's a whole entire process of review that needs to be undertaken to address all the many aspects of violence, the ways in which it can be manifested. Thankfully, however, that the wider provision here for an order will give the judge such discretion to take into consideration different circumstances and to order appropriately. So beyond the scope of the enumeration and noting the concerns raised about the term harassment, which of course we had looked at in LegCom as well. Harassment is taken in its widest sense. That is, you know, efforts to intimidate, to pressure, to aggressively pressure, to cause, you know, emotional upset, and to implement unwanted contact without reasonable purpose, etc. These are all normal language that's applied where the phrase is used, for example, in the Telecoms Act, where it's been for, you know, a couple decades, where it's in the Cybercrimes Act in 9/1 as well, which is about using a device to harass or with the intention to harass. The courts apply the broadest meaning to that term. And similarly with the Telecoms Act, which is the use of where it's the use of a network to harass. And there again, the language is taken in its broadest sense. So we know there are deficiencies, and you know, I've been speaking about it for years now as well. So the reality is that the legislative framework needs to catch up. Society has thankfully been catching up. There's a greater understanding of these issues and the importance of dealing with them, which was not present in '95. And again, that makes this a bit of a source of frustration, yes. But the fact that we're moving here and that progress is continuous, and Minister Grange has committed that the committee will sit early in January, that is a committee that will move ahead with alacrity, using virtual and in-person sittings as well, making sure that we don't get stuck with another lengthy delay on this matter. Mr. President, the matter of mental disability, that phrase, it you know, has dogged us through several pieces of legislation, because until the overarching review that is taking place of the mental health legislation, it would create not only a dissonance, but a difficulty in interpretation if it is just lifted and placed in an amendment bill that's supposed to be read as one with the other. It would be dissonant with all of the changes. Regarding Senator Morris's concern about, or his query regarding the openness to amendments today, his assessment is, I think, entirely on point, and that is the recognition that if any amendment is made today, it would go back to the House, and the entire purpose of us having been out in our numbers, whether we be out in red to support Senator Bunting, or whether we be out otherwise. And I see you've finally gotten him to coordinate with you, so kudos and congratulations. Senator Morris, you did not get the memo today, but it's only the first time, and next year is only a couple of weeks away. So, yes, Mr. President, so I just want to assure that on the point of harassment in particular, there's a broad approach, and it's not unknown to our legislative framework, but it is in fact something that will need to be taken further. And I dealt with the matter of the mental disability, which unfortunately will remain as it is. But with that, Mr. President, recognizing the importance of getting this done, recognizing the importance of having perpetrators recognize, Mr. President, that this government is taking this seriously, that the opposition is taking this seriously as well, that up to 1 million, and we're hoping that the judiciary is taking note as well, that the intention of placing, the legislative intent of placing a figure such as 1 million in here is a signal of the seriousness of this type of violence, that it is not to be treated in an offhand or somehow some type of subordinate or less critical manner because it is domestic. It is, in fact, the exact opposite. And if we look at the figures in terms of the nature of violence that's occurring, the nature of murders, that the gang violence has reduced, and domestic violence is a category which continues because of its nature and the motivations behind it, which are unpredictable in many cases, but subject to intervention in others, that those are things that must be taken seriously, Mr. President. So I'm asking that, having noted the contribution of colleagues on both sides, that we will, I'm asking, Mr. President, that we move to committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Domestic Violence Act read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you very much. I put clause 1. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put clause 2. Those in favor?
Just, Mr. President, noting the editorial error of published. So it's not an amendment, it's just an editorial.
Okay.
So just noting for the record that it is to be removed.
Thank you.
To ask a question, Minister, and that is where the Section 3 of the Principal Act is being amended and deleting subsection 4 and substituting thereof the following. That is where the court, in determining whether to grant leave, it says it may take into account whether the application is in the best interest of the child or dependent, and I understand that. But and in the case of a dependent who does not have a physical or mental disability, and I don't understand that. Should it be, and in the case of a dependent who has a physical, because I can't understand the you're putting back, in the case of a dependent who does not have a physical or mental disability, doesn't it put them back in the first sentence?
In the first category?
Yes, so should it have been
I think it's for
in the case
of doubt.
No,
Because I take
but
your
it
point.
don't make sense. Should it be in the? I can understand if you said, Minister, that in the case of a dependent who has a physical or mental disability, the application now must be considered in accordance with the dependent's best wishes. And there's no conflict between the interest of the person seeking leave and the dependent.
But if they have a mental disability, I think that's where the question lies about considering their best wishes.
That's the
Because
point.
their
That's
best
the very
wishes
point
may
I'm
be-
making.
Yes.
That's the point I'm making, and that's why I say that does not, should not be there. It should be the person who has, because they need special, according to the legislation. Forgive me, Senator Longmore, it is not my legislation. But according to the legislation, they would need a different consideration.
More akin to that of a child, and then otherwise.
Minister, I'm not going to let you get me in trouble with Senator Longmore, you know.
No,
I am
no.
keeping this as forensic as possible. I'm just saying that I think the does not is an error. And it should be in the case of a dependent who has a physical or mental disability, that the application is in accordance with the dependent's best wishes, and there is no conflict between the
Wishes
interests
are
of
best
the person.
interest.
Best interest.
Well, it has
best
wishes here.
Yes.
So thank you, President, for assisting me. It should be best interest, not best wishes.
Chair.
That's the point that I'm trying to communicate. In other words, what I think the legislation ought to be saying is that these sets of persons need a special consideration if you are determining whether or not to grant leave. That's my view.
Chair, if I may, I raised the same point before to the technical committee, to the technical group, and essentially what they indicated was that it is the provision if the person is disabled in this way or diagnosed with a disability, that they may not be capable of making such application. So my question to them So does the provision for the person who is such diagnosed, is it provided for under the Mental Health Act? Or what other act? I did not get a response to that. So I just wanted to add that. I forgot to mention it in my presentation. But that was the response that was.
Thank you, Senator Longmore.
Senator Fraser-Binns is also asking me if it means that under the previous okay.
So I get the impression that there is an intention to make some. I get the impression that there is an intention to make some comprehensive review when the matter goes to committee. It doesn't seem so. So I put.
That's becoming clear. I think the President has spoken. I'm not commenting on what you've said. I'm commenting on the President.
It sounds to me like the clerk is saying that it's a typo.
Flex, eh? Remember, this is the upper house of This is the upper house, remember, okay?
I remember. Say you were warming up with it.
Pardon?
Mr. President, you know, on reflection, there's two thoughts in that clause, you know. Because where it says does not have a physical or mental disability, the application is in accordance with the defendant's best wishes, meaning someone able to exercise their mind to determine what it is that they want out of the application. That's a different thought from if we were to remove the not and say a dependent who has a physical and mental disability, that the application is in accordance, and I think I agree that that should be followed with their best interest. So it's actually two different things we're expressing there. So perhaps some consideration could be given to what we're trying to effect.
No doubt the minister heard every word that you just said. Any comment, Minister?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. So, there are in fact two categories. So a child or a dependent is in one, and then a dependent who does not have, and a dependent in that context would be a dependent with or without a mental disability. And then the court must further consider, in the circumstances, if there is a dependent who does not have a mental disability, that their wishes, that in those circumstances, that they should also, their wishes would be considered. So that is the position.
Thank you very much,
yes,
Minister.
I do think it could be more clear, and undoubtedly it will therefore be
attract
taken
the attention
under review.
of the committee. Thank you very much. So I put clause 2. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. I just remember the note in relation to clause 2 that there is an editorial. I put clause 3. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 4. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment.
Mr. President, might I ask for third reading of the bill?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Domestic Violence Act, read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Mr. President, it is now that time when those clothed in red with one exception. It's a problem.
You see, you were advising your colleagues to utilize that space between their head and their shoulder, and you're not utilizing it.
Yes, Mr. President. Touché. That they have awaited, Mr. President, and that is the continuation of the State of the Nation debate with the intervention by Senator Peter Bunting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members. Senator Bunting, you are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help but notice this lovely postcard that I got from the minister. Dressed. But this.
So you completely understood the reference to those clothes.
This is Christmas red. This is not political red.
It's very nice.
Very lovely card, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me start, as is customary, by thanking all those who contribute to giving me an opportunity to serve in Parliament, my political and professional colleagues, family, friends, support staff, and indeed all those who provide encouragement and support. I'd like to also especially use this opportunity to extend the compliments of the season to all members and to the parliamentary staff. Mr. President, the State of the Nation debate this year has had some interesting contributions from members on both sides. However, as I sit and listen, I often feel like we're sometimes talking about two different countries, two different nations, in two different states. The government senators seem to have a set of talking points that must be included in their presentations. These talking, apart from frequently calling the Prime Minister's name, these talking points include the fact
include the fact that the debt
has been certified.
That the debt, including the fact that the debt to GDP ratio is declining, unemployment is down, and tourism is growing. I have no problem acknowledging progress in these areas because, after all, we started the program of economic reform. And not only did we start it, we did the political heavy lifting. We did the political heavy lifting.
Mr. Bunting, let me just set some, Minister, let me just set some. Why,
when I come hype up this morning?
let me just set some guidelines. The minister is entitled to speak and is entitled to be heard in respectful.
He's speaking it into being.
Can I finish, please?
Prophetic.
The Minister Johnson Smith is entitled to speak and to be heard in silence when she rises. The same courtesy is to be extended to the leader of opposition business as he presents. He is to be heard in respectful silence to the extent that he does not provoke a response. So, Mr. Bunting, please continue. No, in all seriousness, allow the minister, allow the leader of opposition business to speak. Please.
Some are saying I'm rewriting history. They forget that in 2011, not only were we not passing IMF tests, we couldn't even sit the IMF tests. Right? We inherited a very bad situation. And if not for the political capital of Portia Simpson Miller, could not have carried through. And I will credit your administration has sensibly continued our policies in that regard. And it's showing the benefit. Today, however, I will speak about the state of our nation as it is experienced by most citizens. A state with an economy built on a low-wage, low-tech, low-growth model. One where a tightening labor market should give the Jamaican low-wage earner hope that they may finally benefit from a living wage. And then we hear that hope dashed by the voices of exploitative capital who demand that we import poor people willing to work for crumbs. A state where entrepreneurs are put through red tape hell in quotes, and you will hear why I say that. A state where workers have been stripped of hard-won rights, Senator Gill, by the facade of contract work, leaving them one serious illness away from poverty and family catastrophe, and with no pensions for retirement. A state where extractive capital savagely exploits natural resources and damages the environment, dumping toxic waste in our rivers and harbors, strip mining our farmlands and forest watersheds, even in our unique cockpit country. A state with an apartheid system of education and healthcare. A state where families live in fear of violence in their communities, and the government's only solution is to deny innocent citizens their constitutionally guaranteed rights. Mr. President, my presentation is organized in 3 sections. In the first section, I take a quick survey of the economy. The second, I look at the social sectors, and finally, I'll close with a section on national security. In looking at the state of our economy, I want to consider 3 questions. First, how easy is it to do business? Second question, what's the condition of the workers in our workplaces? And third, what's the impact of economic activity on our natural environment? So let me start with the ease of doing business. We have an economy that's stifled by government bureaucracy. What is more astonishing is how the Prime Minister, who has presided over the system in cabinet for 12 of the last 16 years, and as Prime Minister for the last 8 years, has eureka moments when he suddenly realizes what clock has strike. Here's an article that gives an example of what I mean. The headline, the heading of the article, Red Tape Hell. Red Tape Hell. Honest again slams unnecessary delays, preventing more houses from being built faster. Prime Minister, and I'm quoting from the article, Prime Minister Andrew Holness on Friday used a groundbreaking ceremony for a new housing development at Rasta City in Tivoli Gardens, downtown Kingston, to decry unnecessary bureaucracy and other hurdles, which he blamed for depriving many Jamaicans of home ownership. Bureaucracy and hurdles. Prime Minister for 8 years is blaming bureaucracy and hurdles, not taking responsibility. Using the project as an example, Honey said Rasta City is just one of many communities being deprived of development due to people playing politics. Wonder what politics that is. Or dragging their feet and being negligent. Now, what struck me is that after 8 years as Prime Minister, with the power to change bureaucratic procedures, he complains about it as if he's merely an impotent, detached observer. I remember when Bruce Golding was the leader of the GLP, he used to like to say, I have a team, and I am the driver. Apparently, when he handed over the steering wheel to the current Prime Minister, he forgot to tell him that it was now he who was the driver and not still the former leader of the GLP. But I just have to say to the government, beg you, after 8 years, stop blaming others and making excuses for non-performance. There are many other examples. Just last week, Mr. President, I came across a situation where developers with fully approved building plans, this is in St. Anne, more than one development, developers with fully approved building plans, after commencement of construction projects, are being threatened with stop orders because they're told they need a quarrying license to excavate the foundation of the buildings. I know it sounds absurd, but I am certain of that which I speak, and it is more than one. They need a quarry license to excavate the foundation for the building and to remove the excavated material. So, Mr. President, in addition to all the agencies now presently involved in building approval, developers will now have to add the Mines and Quarries Division to the process. This is taking bureaucracy to an absurd point. And let me just say, for completeness, there is one case that a company that I'm associated with was involved. Major project, 30 million US. You're talking billions of Jamaican dollars. And I reached out to the minister, Minister Green, and in fairness to him, he intervened and removed the roadblock. However, we can't have a system where access to the minister will determine whether your project shut down or not. We need to remove this bureaucratic morass. I'll turn now, Mr. President, to the state of the workers in the economy. Many workers in Jamaica are subject to high degrees of job insecurity, and in some cases, downright exploitation. And I see Senator Gill nodding his head in agreement with me. Some employers, and I said some, use the facade of contracting to avoid the legal and ethical obligation to provide sick leave with pay, vacation leave with pay, maternity leave with pay, vacation leave with pay, the right to union representation, Senator Gill. Something I feel you would certainly support me on. And the right to redundancy payments if a business is restructured. The fact of this insecurity, where you have workers working at one institution for 20 years in a row on 46-month contracts, that is a huge degree of job insecurity. In fact, studies have shown a connection, Senator Gill, between job insecurity and heart disease, diabetes, ulcers, headache, back pains, insomnia, the stress of working under those conditions where any morning you could reach to work and that's it. 2 weeks notice and that's it. Businesses have often tried to justify this practice by claiming that their business or their sector cannot afford to pay better wages and that their customers could not afford to pay the pass-through cost of higher wages. My response to those arguments is that if the viability of a business is predicated on exploitation of workers, then you should seek another business. And you know what is true, Mr. President? When these assumptions are tested, they're often proven to be false. The recent example of the security guard industry, no credit to government policy, this was the court, resulted in an approximate doubling of before-tax salaries for security guards. However, I've spoken with the principals of two of the largest companies in the private security industry since that, and they have confirmed to me that there has been no net reduction in employment in their firms as a result of the significant wage increases. So mash down that line. This pretend contracting practice is still commonplace in many sectors, tourism, retail, BPO, other sectors, and it must be challenged, Senator Gill. I'm sure you will agree with me that the hard-fought battle for workers' rights by political giants such as Alexander Bustamante, Norman Manley, Hugh Shearer, Michael Manley, Portia Simpson, and indeed, maybe not quite in that category, but our own Senators Lambert Brown and Cavan Gill, must not be betrayed. Must not be betrayed. The ultimate security for workers is that after a lifetime of hard work and productive contribution, they can enjoy a retirement of relative comfort provided by an adequate pension. However, that is not the reality that will face most Jamaican workers in retirement. The Pension Industry Association of Jamaica provides us with some helpful statistics. There are 817 private sector plans in total, of which only 363 are active. 438 are in the process of termination, and 16 are inactive. So in all these private sector plans, they have a total of 154,411 contributors. Tourism workers, Pension Industry Association has it as 8,000. I think the most recent figure is 9,000. But just to put that 9,000 in perspective, it is from a potential pool of 350,000 tourism, direct and indirect. 350,000. So we're talking 2.5% of that 350,000 cohort. So in total, nationally, only, including now the 80,000 public sector workers, plus the private sector, plus the tourism workers, we have only 18%, 1/8 of the employed labor force who are in a pension scheme. Everyone is in a pension scheme. But what makes it worse in the long term is when you look at over time, we have a growing old age dependency ratio in Jamaica. And by old age dependency, I'm talking about the total number of people over 65 versus those in the working age population. Working age is defined as 15 to 64, but in practical, it's really 18 to 64. And when you look at the declining birth rates in Jamaica, the slowing of the population growth, you see that we have moved from an 8% dependency ratio in the 60s to about a 14% presently, but it's climbing. So over time, this problem is only going to get worse. So even, I recall, as a young person growing up, I would hear people say in the community, me pick near my pension. But with that old age dependency ratio, that mirage will soon become obvious that it's impossible to maintain. So that is the fragile state of workers in Jamaica. But I want to, without treading too much on Senator Sophia's pet area of passion, interest, and responsibility, I want to look at the impact of that business is having, doing business is having on the environment. The PIOJ's review of economic performance for the January to September 2023 period shows that mining and quarrying was the star performer. It grew by 123%. Now, much of that reflected the recommencement of operations at Jamaica. But still, it was the major contributor to the 2.8% overall growth, or we could call it recovery. However, bauxite mining in Jamaica has led to deforestation, soil erosion, habitat destruction, disrupting biodiversity. The operations generate dust and noise, harming air quality, agriculture, and wildlife. Alumina processing contributes to climate change through energy-intensive processes, emitting greenhouse gases. Toxic byproducts like red mud threaten water sources, aquatic life, and community health. Now, Mr. President, I speak from long first-hand knowledge of the industry. My mother worked with Alcan for 2 decades. I worked, when I was doing my engineering degree, I worked as an intern at Jamalco for 3 consecutive summers of 4 months each. Recently, I had the opportunity to observe the mining and processing operations at Yuatan. I have represented 2 of the most affected constituencies most affected by bauxite and alumina industry, Southeast Clarendon and Central Manchester. And let me tell you something. When the original investors in the bauxite alumina sector came to Jamaica, talking companies like Alcan, Kaiser, and Alcoa, they came in the 50s and 60s. They came with an investment horizon of 50 years. The facilities were built and maintained to the standards of the facilities in their home countries. The workers, the Jamaican workers, received premium compensation relative to other sectors in Jamaica. Bauxite workers were the envy of all the other sectors. Not so today, Mr. President. Most facilities are run down and operated on a just enough maintenance to keep going basis. The mining is done by local contractors. The haulage is done by local contractors. The loading is done by local contractors. Financing of the operations is largely provided by these local contractors and other suppliers who are all paid in arrears. The taxes and levies to government have been reduced to a trickle relative to prior periods. The obligations to reclaim and restore the mined-out pits within a defined period are most often not being observed by the operators. Let's look at one of the lowest value-added, purely extractive operations. Discovery Bauxite Partners that operates in St. Ann. It's a joint venture between the government, Jamaica Bauxite Mining owns 51%, and Discovery Bauxite Operations Limited, a foreign-owned company, they have 49% in the partnership, but they manage the operations. This is the entity that the government has allowed to prospect and mine within the cockpit country. I understand that Discovery Bauxite Partners owes over $8 million in unsecured credit to Petrojam for fuel. Around $5 million, these are US dollars. $8 million US dollars, right? So we're talking 1.2 billion Jamaican dollars to Petrojam. This is the same Petrojam that was in some need for government support for their funding a couple months ago, just recently. Approximately 5 million to mining and haulage contractors. Perhaps what is worse, over 2 million US, that's 300 million Jamaican, to small landowners whose properties have already been mined but haven't received payment as per the agreement. Now, maybe the Petrojams and the haulage and mining contractors can afford, but certainly these small landowners, it is wicked to not.
Repeat that.
It is wicked to not pay them promptly in accordance with the arrangements.
Wickedness.
The mined out pits. You know, most people who may not be familiar with the mining operations but have had a chance to drive on the highway, the Highway 2000 conceived by P.J. Patterson.
Yes,
right? The one to Mandeville, and you drive through some areas of South Manchester, and you can see huge pits that have not been reclaimed, but no mining is taking place. That is really a strategy that they use, because as long as the pit is open, as long as there's some level of reserve left, then the clock doesn't start ticking on the reclamation. So I can tell you, there are pits in Central and South Manchester that have been 95% mined for over a decade.
Yes. Yes.
For over a decade. And I am absolutely sure there is no intention of these companies to ever do the reclamation in those pits. So if Discovery Bauxite Operations Limited declares bankruptcy tomorrow, the taxpayers of this country will be left holding commercial liabilities of billions of Jamaican dollars. That's just the commercial liabilities. But what about the environmental liabilities, Comrade Senator Sophia and Comrade Sophia?
It's a good term.
These environmental liabilities are potentially far greater and will be suffered by generations of Jamaicans, some yet unborn. Yes. And this is not unique to the Southwest St. Ann operations. Rusal, for example, would be no different. When these companies are ready to leave, the foreign managers, if they have foreign managers, only have to pick up their briefcases and head to the airport. Or if they have local managers, just send them an email and tell them that that's that. It's time to face the economic reality that the bauxite alumina industry in Jamaica is in terminal decline. And while I'm not advocating that we jump up and shut it down tomorrow morning, we must make a deliberate plan to phase it out and minimize the damage to our environment. Sustainable practices, strict regulations, and eco-friendly technologies are crucial for mitigating the environmental impact and securing a sustainable future for Jamaica. You know, Mr. President, for a very long time, and I'm going to say this honestly, with both administrations, both PNP and JLP administrations, although it's 3-1 JLP since I've been making this point.
This is one time when you win.
No, because I'm talking the 2007 to the current period, right? I have, every time there was a withdrawal from the Capital Development Fund, I would get up and make this point. I would say, when the bauxite is being mined and sold and the companies are earning a revenue, the corresponding liability for reclamation should be put in an escrow account. You can have it at, you know, if the bauxite companies want an international bank, but with an escrow agreement. When the rehabilitation is being done, they can withdraw from this account to do the rehabilitation. However, if they don't do the rehabilitation, then the government of Jamaica can withdraw those funds and pay for the rehabilitation. Makes sense. It's consistent with what's called a matching principle in accounting. You know, as you make the revenue, you recognize the expenses and you provide for it. Why on earth are we and our children bearing these unsecured liabilities for mining and revenue that was generated decades previously? It makes absolutely no sense. No sense. You know, Mr. President, if you want to appreciate the extent of the destruction of our forests and farmlands, use the time-lapse loop feature on Google Maps. I don't even know how to use it myself, but a younger person should help me and presented me with the final product. But I was struck, and if we can, the resolution on this screen is not particularly strong, but if you, this is southern Manchester, and this is central and south Manchester in 1984. If you look, this is Point C, which is actually in central Manchester. Point C is just about the only facility you can see on the belt line going towards St. Elizabeth. But all of this is well forested and treed. If you go to the next slide, which is South Manchester 2021, you see now there is hardly any forest. It's just scrub. Scrub is when they do the so-called reclamation, even with the 6 inches of topsoil, which is all that is required. The first heavy rain comes, washes off that 6 inch of topsoil, and the scrub that's left cannot grow crops, cannot even grow grass properly. So you really have a permanent deforestation of the areas. If we go to Southwest St. Anne, on the next slide, maybe a little harder to see, but again, this is the mined out area in 1984. Obviously, mining was already taking place then. So you see that mined out area. If you go to the next slide, which is 2020, that area now takes up this whole, not only St. Anne, this is the line, so it's going over into Trelawney now and potentially into that delicate cockpit country. So, Mr. President, I don't want to beat up only on the bauxite alumina companies, although they have, that sector is having a huge environmental impact. But just recently we saw where the NWC, private corporate entities, all were fingered in recent fish kills in the Kingston Harbor and in the Rio Cobre. And, you know, I feel a special, if you put up the Rio Cobre, the other picture on the Rio Cobre, on the right is the Kingston Harbor, and on the left is a picture from the Rio Cobre fish kills. My brother restocked after the Windalco leak last year, restocked free of charge the Rio Cobre. And there's most of the fish, or many of the fish that he restocked are now killed by this recent toxic effluent release into the Rio Cobre. But he has offered to continually restock it free of charge. but he's coming across all kind of obstacles just because, I guess because he's my brother. They won't even take freeness. They will not even accept freeness from him to help the situation. So to recap, Mr. President, the answers to the questions on the state of the economy. Business growth and development is being strangled by red tape. Second, most workers operate in an environment of job insecurity and in some cases even exploitation, with no pensions to cushion their retirement. And thirdly, we are sacrificing the natural environment for a tiny fraction of the value it holds for future generations. I'll now turn to the social sectors. And I ask rhetorically, what is the state of our nation when it comes to the critical social sectors of health and education? And again, I will quote, for health, I will borrow from a recent newspaper report titled, and I quote, "State of Misery." State of misery. You could move to that slide for me. No. No. So, okay, I don't think you have that slide. But here, let me read from it. And it will be in the document I circulate, or the Parliament will circulate for me after. State of misery. Only 47% of equipment in the public health sector fully functional. And I'm quoting from the article in the Gleaner, August 2023. Less than half, well, the other one, by the way, I quoted was from the Observer. Red tape hell, that was from the Observer. So I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to show that I'm not using one source. Red tape hell, November 25th, 2023, by Jason Cross, Observer staff reporter, just for your information. But I return to the state of the nation when it comes to health. A state of misery. Less than half of the equipment in the country's hospitals is fully functional because of poor maintenance, which Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton admits affects the level of efficiency in the public health sector, lamenting that there is too much downtime in the sector. You might see a pattern here. Prime Minister decrying, the Minister of Health lamenting, as if they don't have any agency in solving these issues. They are observers, detached and impotent to fix it. Lamenting that there is too much downtime in the sector from non-functioning equipment, he says that this cultivates a, quote, misery factor among staff who are unable to do their jobs and patients who are not able to access desired service, end quote. Mr. President, the public healthcare system is in the worst shape, the most rundown it has been in decades. Video clips of hospital patients with drip needles in their arms, lying in passageways and on wooden benches, or sitting up in chairs for days waiting on a bed to free up, have become commonplace in social media. And I'm not relying entirely on social media. I recently visited a university student who had been taken to Mandeville Regional Hospital, and I was horrified that after 3 days, she was still in the casualty waiting area, where conditions appeared similar to the pictures of hospitals we see in Gaza or some other war zone. The Cornwall Regional Hospital renovation must have by now earned the title of mother of all cost overruns. It started with a budget of $2 billion and a timeline of about a year. It has now reached $14 billion and climbing, and 7 years have gone. Both cost and the length of time to complete continue to escalate. We have seen nothing indicating that the promised expansion at Bustamante Children's Hospital is taking place. We have seen reports and reports from no lesser persons than the former chairman of the board of the University Hospital of the West Indies of improper ministerial interference in the operations of UWI. Cronyism is rampant. In fact, just a few days ago, I saw, and I don't know if any of my colleagues saw this heartbreaking clip in social media of a female patient at a hospital. She had an American accent, and she was pleading with the nurses for hospital tissue, for toilet tissue, because there was none in the hospital bathrooms. And she was being advised that you have to bring your own personal tissue and those things. Wow. Now, you know, we have tourists coming through our airports. They don't have to provide toilet tissue. But a sick person, whether tourist or national, who may not have planned to end up in the hospital, may have ended up there because of car accident, unanticipated emergency illness, they're being told that the basic toilet paper is not available in our hospital. It is a shame. While we boast about debt to GDP ratio coming down. This is the state of the nation that our people and some of our visitors experience every day. The one area that the Ministry of Health and Wellness is perhaps best in class in is public relations. Public relations. There may be no budget to buy toilet tissue. There may be no budget to maintain the hospital equipment. But billions are always available to be spent creating the image that Minister Market Me is a performer. Every piece of information communicated from the Ministry of Health and Wellness is accompanied by the minister's image, if not the minister himself delivering the message. There is no more chief medical officer and permanent secretary and hospital CEO. Everything is concentrated. Every message, every media opportunity must be with the minister. And I will say, Comrade Allen, the Minister of Tourism runs a very close second. Very close second.
Well, I don't know who's first.
It's probably a tie. I think it probably would be fair to say it's a tie. Let me turn to education. Yes. Let me turn to education. And I'm going to here use the voice of Senator Dana Morris Dixon, in her report, although we refer to it as the Orlando Patterson report. It's really a report of distinguished persons, including our colleague senator, before she was tribalized.
Yes.
Or before she was tribalized. Now, the report is a little dated. The report is a little dated. Was it 2021 the report was published? Senator, don't distance yourself. Don't distance yourself. Was it 2021 or 22? She's been told not to answer. 22. Okay, so it's a 2022 report. It's not very outdated. It's a year or a year plus old. And here are just 2 or 3 quotes from that report. Not my words. I'm speaking in Senator Dana Morris Dixon's voice and her committee, the committee's voice. But you are the only member of the committee here, so I'm hearing it as if it is spoken by you. And I'm quoting now. I'm quoting now. Exam results indicated that at the end of 6 years of primary schooling, 59% of students were failing mathematics and 45% were failing in language arts. Performance at the end of secondary schooling was not much better. Overall, only 28% passed 5 or more subjects with English and mathematics. And that 28% came mainly from the traditional high schools.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Minister is asking that we be permitted to sit beyond 1:20 to allow the member to complete his, beyond 1:30 to allow the minister to complete his presentation. Is that the request? That is.
So it's 2 in 1.
The question is that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 and that the minister be given sufficient time.
Oh, aye.
And that the speaker be given sufficient time to complete his presentation. Those in favor?
Aye.
Again?
Why, Mr. President, I know you are very prophetic, you know.
You know, Mr. President, I appreciate the example you're setting for your fellow presiding officer. At least a facade of impartiality. At least a pretense of impartiality. At least, it may be genuine, but at least, at a minimum. That was. But let me just recap. 28%. That's basically 1 in 4, Senator Fitzhenley. 1 in 4. I know you come from a family that highly values education. And, you know, generally speaking, they have used it productively. And I'm not going to be naughty and say exception proves the rule, right? But I know his father and his siblings and many distinguished scholars. And he had made a good start too. So I'm not being facetious. They would appreciate the importance of education, his family. And all of us will agree. And I'm not saying it started now. It's the report, in fact, reviewed the report of 2004, I believe it was. And in fact, many of the problems were the same. 16, 17, 18 years later, the same problems. But 1 in 4 meeting what is considered a high school certification, 5 subjects with math and English, cannot be acceptable. Cannot be acceptable. And to my mind, another section holds the answer to it. And this section, and I'm quoting now, we are mindful that equity and the provision or equal resources are not the same. That indeed the latter may exacerbate the former. So they're saying giving equal resources, this approach where you give 17,000 or 19,000 or 25,000 per student at Campion or Immaculate versus the per student at Kingston High, Tarrant, one of the non-traditional schools generally, right? And there are a few of the non-traditional schools who are actually doing quite well. So I'm not blanket, but we can say, let me say the performing versus the non-performing to try and, yes, I don't have Senator Longmore in here to tell me what the politically correct term is. But we have to be more progressive in how we allocate the resources in the education system. Expanding the provision of quality education for everyone while prioritizing the needs of the poor and the disadvantaged, end quote. In summary, Mr. President, if we want to end the education apartheid, which has been talked about for years, we have to allocate much more resources to the disadvantaged schools and their communities. And I'm sure you nod your head in agreement because I'm quoting from your report. You've almost reached your quota of mentions for the day. So the final section I want to turn to, Mr. President, is the section on national security. And I'm particularly sorry that Senator Webby is not here because he dedicated some of his State of the Nation presentation to addressing this area. But, over the last few months, probably going back to about August, we have been hearing the government and the GCF heralding and celebrating the reduction in murders relative to last year. In August, it was about 20%, I think, the reduction was relative to last year. High number in August. Presently, it's down to 8%. But even while you've been heralding that, Senator Hill, the public has reacted with confusion and disbelief as the daily media stories reporting murders, double murders, even triple and quadruple murders and shootings don't seem to accord with the statement coming from the government and the GCF. Only a couple of Fridays ago, Senator Webby was here reciting almost as an article of religious faith, because it isn't evidence-based, so it must be an article of religious faith, that SOEs work. That SOEs work.
Divine intervention is
Maybe
welcome.
I wouldn't have had a problem if he was asking for divine intervention to make SOEs work, but he was suggesting that they were already working. That same Friday he was presenting and making that statement, the leadership of both government and the GSF were touting the supposed success of the recent SOEs initially imposed in November, and which spurred a further performative declaration of 5 additional SOEs that Friday that Senator Webby was speaking. However, their self-congratulatory indulgence was short-lived, as at least 21 murders took place in the next 3 to 4 days, most in those SOE parishes. Most of them in those SOE parishes. That week, that Senator Webby declared emphatically that SOEs work. There were 38 murders reported across Jamaica. 38 murders reported. This is from the JCF's weekly report. The incidents of violence coming to public attention intensified thereafter, including the heartbreaking murder of a second form student of Anchovy High School, Senator Allen, Randy James. This was after the declaration in the SOE parish, right? Fatally shot while seeking shelter during a downpour. The murder of businessman, well-known businessman William Baba Roots Webb at his home in Darliston in the SOE parish after the declaration. The double murder of the Thompson brothers, 18 and 20 years old, in Farmview, Green Pond, St. James, SOE parish. The double murder of the 2 Moody siblings in Westmoreland, and the bodies being filmed, being buried in a shallow grave. Now imagine the impunity with which criminals feel they can operate, to be filming the burial after the murder in an SOE parish. Another, we've become accustomed to the attacks on the beryllium vehicles by multiple armed thugs. It's hardly even news, except when you see a beryllium vehicle draw into a plaza, you want to see people take with themselves. And just this morning, I read that the bursar of Hopewell High murdered in the SOE parish of Hanover on the school compound in broad daylight. These incidents highlight an administration bankrupt of ideas that continue to rely solely on ineffective emergency measures. These measures will not curb the deeply rooted issues of crime and violence. Just this morning, I read an article written by no less an authority than the former Chief of Defense Staff and Commissioner of Police. Excellent article, highlighting a point that I've repeatedly made here, which is that this JLP administration has made a massive misallocation of resources to the army instead of the police. It makes absolutely no sense at all, except in the context of the long-term continual use of states of emergency, which allow the army to operate autonomously. And by the way, this is somebody who spent 35 years in the army, 5 years as a chief. So this is not an anti-army person. This is somebody who is making a very clinical decision. True professional, because he has seen both sides. I noticed the leader of government business is captivated by the current chart that my assistant Tash has put up on the screen. Again, resolution is poor, but this is well, this starts from 2007 and goes 2008 to 2023. So that's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16 years not enough for you, right? 16 years. 16 years. Now, here are the years. Let me see if I can get this pointer going. Here are the years where we had SOEs. Here are the years where we had SOEs. Here are the years with no states of emergency, right? Go to the next slide for me. Stop chat foolishness. Stop chat foolishness. Stop chat foolishness. Look here now. Here are four. Here, I know it burn you, you know. It's all right. Ball out. It burn you. It hot. It hot, man. It hot. Ball out. No problem. We know it hot, but hush. It hot, but hush.
Especially when it's steering you in the face.
Thank you. This is that last 16 years grouped into 4-year periods. The first is the period of the JLP administration led by Bruce Golding. The second is the PNP administration 2012 to 2015 led by Portia Simpson Miller. And the third and fourth are the two administrations led by Andrew Holness. And what we will see is that the average for that 4 years, those 4 years under PNP was 1,129. 1,129. Too high, but we were tackling the issue from multiple directions. And achieved, by the way, the lowest average for any 4-year period in the last 2 decades. Now calculate the average for the almost 8 years the JLP has been in office, 2016 through 2023. And you get an average annual figure of 1,416. Wow. 1,416. 1,129, 1,416. On average, about 300 more, right? Murdered each year under this JLP administration than during the previous PNP administration. This is a whopping 25% increase in the annual murder rate between the two periods. That means more than 2,300 Jamaicans additionally have been murdered over the last 8 years than if the JLP administration had just maintained, not improved, just maintained the average. 2,300. And let me make it clear, Mr. President. Let me make it clear. I take no joy in pointing this out to the public. And there are vested interests, starting with the Holness political administration, its cronies and apologists, who would prefer if we were silent on this issue. However, we cannot talk about good governance. We cannot talk about accountability, yet hide the Holness administration's abject failure at fighting violent crime. The opposition PNP cannot be complicit in manufacturing the consent of the people against their own interests. We owe it not just to the memory of the thousands murdered, but to the tens of thousands of grieving relatives and friends to the terrified communities, to the environment of fear that cause people to take with themselves if they see an armored cash delivery vehicle in their vicinity. And inevitably, we'll be asked, what would the opposition do differently? Well, you can start by pointing to what the opposition was doing differently in the 2012 to 2016 period that resulted in fewer murders, even though the ministry had a fraction of the financial resources and manpower that is there now. Yeah. The major difference, and Hardly Lewin makes this point in his article today, the major difference is that we recognize that crime prevention efforts and social investments were as important or even more important long-term than just crime control or suppression efforts. That's why we developed the Unite for Change initiative, for example. I well remember then opposition leader Honis shouting at me in Parliament, "Don't tell me about any whole of society approach to crime. It is the government's responsibility. If not, why do we elect a government? There is a lot that we can do." And all of that is quotations. Then when the JLP came to office, they abandoned the Unite for Change program, defunded the Peace Management Initiative, phased out the Citizen Security and Justice program. Every crime prevention initiative was abandoned, and all the Ministry of National Security resources were redirected to the failed policy of the militarization of policing and to the serial and routine use of states of emergency. Wow. After almost 8 years of abject failure in keeping his promise of people being able to sleep with their windows and doors open, imagine my astonishment when I read a media article recently about the PM touring Project Star in central Kingston. And Project Star is really a private sector version of the PNP's Unite for Change initiative. In the article, the PM declared, and I quote, "It is a whole of society effort," end quote. End quote. This is the same person. This is the same person that in opposition said, quote, "Don't tell me about any whole of society approach to crime." Right? 8 years along, and he finally realizes it is a whole of society effort. Jamaica has paid dearly in lives lost, 2,300 additional lives lost, because PM Honis has been a slow learner when it comes to adopting policies to sustainably reduce violent crime. The Commissioner of Police cannot avoid some of the responsibility for crime. His inexplicable offensive on the leadership of the Police Federation for calling out the High Command on their failure to effectively implement an order from the court regarding overtime for police officers was unnecessary. But I'm not a lawyer, but I think there's, they have something called aggravated or aggravation, the concept of aggravated damages, for example. The court has subsequently ruled that the Police Federation chairman must be reinstated. Yes. And they have not. And now he's having to go back to court to seek contempt, to address the contempt of court. So let us let the court work that out. Or you want to work it out in here? All I'm saying, I noticed, I'm not talking about the merits of the case, I'm talking about a judgment of the court. Which is on appeal. Right? Whether it's not appeal, there was no stay of execution. All right, okay. There was you can move on anyway. There was no stay of execution. Move on. I have authoritative counsel on this to my left, right? But the truth of the matter is, the High Command is coming across as petty and vindictive. Petty and vindictive, arrogant. And that's at best. At worst, they're suggesting that they can operate with impunity. court can't tell them anything because I guess they are the ones who would have to enforce the court orders anyway. And they're operating as if they're above the law. The commissioner's deployment of resources is also perplexing. Don't put all of the blame on him because some of it is policy. The thousands of additional soldiers, the billions in capital expenditure that have gone to the JDF, that is not his determination. But once he gets resources, he has sole responsibility to deploy them. Now, for months, we've been hearing about the hotspot parishes, Hanover, Westmoreland. Westmoreland in particular has been in the news from end of October right through to the present. St. James, perennial hotspot parish. They graduated almost 300 new graduates at the end of November. Not a single graduate was assigned to any of these understaffed hotspot parishes. No additional resources. No additional resources. There are two centralized divisions called Specialized Operations and PSTEP. Together they have over 1,500 personnel and scores of equipment, vehicles, etc. They lack for nothing.
Them get any of the used car?
I said they lack for nothing. It would be the rural police station with one vehicle serving 16 communities that would get the used car, if it ever comes. If it ever comes. But the allocation of these resources in these centralized units has failed. PSTEB, when PSTEB was formed, if we take the years before PSTEB, typically fatal crashes were 300 to 400. Since PSTEB has been formed, fatal crashes are now 400 to 500 every single year since it was formed. So the idea that they were going to take command and take control of the public spaces and the roads has not proven to be correct. Similarly, every divisional commander will tell you that specialized ops does not support them effectively. If they had those, if you took spec ops and divided those personnel and allocated them across the police divisions, you'd get much better results. So the government has made errors in allocating resources. The High Command has compounded those errors in their allocation within the GSAF. And the Prime Minister, the Minister of Security, or the Minister of Insecurity as he's being increasingly called, and the Commissioner of Police must be held accountable by the people of Jamaica for failing to ensure the safety of our communities. It's imperative to adopt a more comprehensive and nuanced approach, one that targets the root causes of crime while safeguarding the lives and security of all Jamaicans. So in conclusion, Mr. President, to summarize the state of our nation presently, and I want to paraphrase the beloved Portia Simpson Miller, who we celebrated the anniversary of her birth a few days ago. She said, to paraphrase her, the state of our nation is one where we may be balancing the books, but not balancing people's lives. So time come now to release our entrepreneurs from stifling bureaucracy. Time come now to protect the hard-won rights of workers. Time come now to safeguard our environment from extractive capitalism. Time come now to end apartheid in the education and health sectors. Time come now for an understanding of the importance of crime prevention combined with crime control. Time come now for the police to become the guardians of the human rights of every Jamaican. Not a watered-down version of the army. And finally, time come now for the Jamaican people to be liberated from the paralyzing fear of violent crime. Thank you.
you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is 1:45.
To suspend the State of the Nation.
Mr. President, and yes, we will ask for the suspension
Because
of
it's
the,
1:45.
Yes.
You know, no.
Drunk never.
Yes, 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 thank you. And we have come to ask for the suspension, Mr. President, of the State of the Nation debate. Mr. President, there was a matter on the order paper, or rather not on the order paper, a matter on the agenda today, which is the motion to establish a Joint Select Committee. I asked for suspension of standing orders to allow me to move a motion.
Okay, so the question, first of all, is that the State of the Nation debate be suspended for a date to be fixed. Those in favor?
Aye.
In relation to the motion, Minister, you can go ahead.
Yes, Mr. President, but I also wanted to note that I wish to propose an amendment to the motion. We have had a request made of the Minister for Senator Longmore to be added to the committee, and I therefore wish to ask that the motion be amended to add Sapphire Longmore before I put the motion to approve the committee members in totality.
Joint Select.
I don't have to move the amendment?
That's in relation to the Joint Select Committee to look at the domestic violence
Mr.
legislation.
President. Yes, Mr.
I don't have to put that. That is being...
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
I ask that the motion be approved.
Your members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Thank you, Minister.
Mr. President, may I move that other motion now? Thank you. Just to, of course, take the opportunity, Mr. President, as we take the recess for the season, to wish all senators, all parliamentary staff, all ancillary staff, everyone indeed who has a hand in making the operations of this important democratic institution function effectively. Mr. Marshall, we thank you for your professional and precise management of matters. Mr. President, we thank, although we don't always recognize them, Mr. President, we not only thank our Hansard writers who dedicate themselves to preserving accurate records, we also thank the cafeteria and kitchen staff who make sure that we are well fed. And Mr. President, we thank Ms. Aiken for her continued, again, assurance of inclusive sharing of the parliamentary process of both chambers and, of course, of committees, and to say how much we appreciate the service that she gives this nation in this regard. She is a game changer. Mr. President, just to wish everyone and their families every blessing of the season, joy, peace, and love, Mr. President, as we don't forget, ensure that we don't forget the reason for the season and move into, can I tell you, I did not have time to locate it. My Christmas tree is not up. So we're a little behind. It's been a busy year. But I really do want to express the warmest expression, even to our friend Charles, Senator from the West, who is gathering with us virtually. We wish you speedy healing, sir. Senator Brown, who also is not with us. Senator Sinclair, Senator Scott Motley says to tell you that she misses you. Yes, he's waving and smiling since you're not looking. Yes, Mr. President. And with that, I would simply ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. I thought we had heard enough from you, but...
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to associate and join the leader of government business in those remarks and the compliments of the season to all those who she included, and I will not repeat again. I had hoped that I would have seen our colleague, Senator Matthew Samuda, today. And so that I could have congratulated him in person, as I recently learned of his marriage and his deepening of his connections with the Observer and all of those things. So I really want to, that was a joke and tease. But I really want to wish him all the best, and I'm just sorry he's not here. But since we may not see him, I assume he's honeymooning, but since we may not see him wait till the next year, I would just like to extend our congratulations and best wishes to him on his recent marriage.
Thank you very much, both Minister and Senator Bunting. You know, I just want to, of course,
Oh, you're going to...
yeah, I just want to, of course, echo the sentiments of both of you with relation to our gratitude to all the members of staff of the Parliament and the support staff, of course, the Hansard writers, and all persons involved in making our contribution to the democracy work. I have been really sort of contemplating saying something, and I said I wasn't going to say it, and then I wrote it down, and then I did. But I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it anyway. No, I heard it's something that was said that has put me in a state of complete confusion. Because I heard the Prime Minister made a statement while addressing a number of members of the diaspora. And he said, you know, we're going to have to look, talking about the comprehensive approach that we need to take to violence in the society. And he said we have to start to look at the question of hate speech and how people speak and how we communicate with each other, and the use of the phrase hate speech. And to my absolute befuddlement, prominent leaders of the church came out to say that we should think carefully about outlawing hate speech because it may infringe on religious freedom. And I am really baffled by the notion that a religious organization could be advocating for the right to participate in hate speech. So if any member of the church who feels that a ban on hate speech is going to infringe on religious freedom, they need to come and explain to me, if possible, if they wish, what they really are afraid of. And I think that one of those that made such a comment was the learned Roman Catholic Archbishop, who said we have to be careful that by banning hate speech we may infringe on religious freedom. I'm in a state of complete confusion in this time when we celebrate the birth of the Prince of Peace. Minister?
Mr. President, I had only wished to take my feet again to add my congratulations to Minister Samuda in his absence, sir. And to say when he returns, I'm sure members will want to express more fully their sentiments on this new phase of his life. So thank you again, Mr. President, and I ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Thank you. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned for the last time, subject to any unforeseen circumstances in the year of 2023. This Senate now stands adjourned. Thank you very much all.
is one of my favorite Jamaican proverbs. In fact, me grew up with it. Want it, can't get it. Get it, no want it. In other words, the person who has the most need can't get what they want, But the person who has in abundance doesn't want what they have. Want it, can't get it. Get it, no want it.
It's a beautiful boy! Everyone! Come and see! The baby is born!
It's Thursday, December 21. In the headlines, motorists urged to obey road rules. 50 driver's licenses suspended. In business news, VMBS to increase fees in 81 categories of services. Regionally, inaugural Suriname Airways flight touches down in Barbados. And in sports, West Indies test squad named for tour of Australia. This is the news on PBC Jamaica. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. Assistant Commissioner of Police Gary McKenzie is warning motorists to obey the rules of the road or they will feel the effects of the law. He says just about 50 motorists have had their licenses suspended since the new Road Traffic Act came into force in February. The new law updates fines and penalties for breaches. Since it came into effect, more than 535,000 tickets have been issued to motorists for various offences. The police say 720,694 traffic tickets issued for the breaches of the road code last year. Under the legislation, an accumulation of traffic tickets for offences including speeding, driving or operating motor vehicle while using electronic communication devices, and careless driving causing collision now results in demerit points added to the driver's license. Licenses are suspended through the courts or when motorists accumulate 10 or more points. Party organizers are being reminded to apply for the requisite permits before they stage these events. Head of the Jamaica Constabulary Force Corporate Communications Unit, Senior Superintendent of Police Stephanie Lindsay, says it is a necessary precaution. The matter came up at a recent JIS think tank. SSP Lindsay says the first thing to do is seek a permit from the municipal office.
For some events, you need a certificate from the fire department. You also need to make contact with JCAP to see they will have an interest in your event as well. Under the Noise Abatement Act, it requires that you make a written request application to the commanding officer for the parish or the division in which you intend to host that event at least 10 days prior to hosting the event.
SSP Lindsay notes that organizers are required to submit a written request to the commanding officer in advance of the event so as to facilitate proper reconnaissance by the police.
To determine the suitability of the venues that they choose and the individuals as well who are hosting these events, whether the promoters, if there are any risk or threat that could arise in the event that they host this event.
She says permits are granted in writing.
So between Sunday and Thursday, the police can grant you permit up to 12 midnight. Fridays and Saturdays up to 2 a.m.
SSP Lindsay says national events are usually granted permission to go beyond 2 a.m. She says permit has to be given by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport in that case. She says if promoters do not have the requisite permits, then the event is likely to be shut down as the persons are operating contrary to the law. Right Start, prioritizing early childhood education. That was the theme of the recently concluded Jamaica Teachers Association's Early Childhood Education Conference. Denita Rodney gives us more details on this story.
While speaking at the conference, senior lecturer in early childhood education at the University of West Indies, Mona, Dr. Zoe Kincaid-Clark, spoke on why early childhood education should be a priority. She says access to high-quality early childhood education can make a difference in a child's trajectory as it is a protective factor.
So early childhood care and education, or early childhood education, is considered to be what we call a protective factor. A protective factor meaning that with all the circumstances that children face, it cushions them. So if they come from a situation where the home environment is not strong and stabilizing, and the community is not stabilizing and strong, and the parenting practices they are exposed to is not strong and stabilizing, if they have a chance to go to Miss Matty's basic school, and Miss Matty's basic school gives them support, provides them with stimulation, provides them with good nutrition, that is a protective factor. It cushions them from the full effects of negative behaviors and or what we call adverse environmental factors.
She continued her presentation by listing some of the negative effects of low-quality early childhood education.
So children who do not have access to high-quality care and education, poorer cognitive and educational outcomes, higher illnesses, psychiatric illnesses, as well as other non-communicable diseases. They're more likely to display antisocial behaviors. They're less likely to be financially successful in their adult years. They have lower life expectancy, and they're more likely to have chronic illnesses. This is all related to the quality of your early care and education. And then we can talk about the benefits.
Dr. Kincaid-Clark informed those present that children's behavior in the classroom are often a result of outside influences and teachers should be prepared to deal with them.
The fundamental thing is that many of the things that happen inside the classroom are not a product of the classroom. They're a product of what happened outside of the classroom that children brought into the classroom. And so to be an effective early childhood teacher, it means that you need to have strategies to deal with the outer road things and deal with it inside the classroom.
Reporting for the news on PBCJ, I'm Denita Rodney.
Mrs. Thelma Morris has been giving service to her community, her parish, and the country by extension through teaching for over 30 years. She has a passion for ensuring that children are given the right start in their education journey. In this episode of Community Heroes, we're in Pepper St. Elizabeth, heading to Wilmore Prep School to meet up with our heroine. We finally made it to Wilmore Preparatory School here in Pepper St. Elizabeth. We're here to talk to Miss Thelma Morris. She's the principal here. And of course, we brought some goodies for the students. So we're here with the founder of the school, Miss Thelma Morris. Miss Morris, thanks so very much for agreeing to speak with us.
You're most welcome.
The school was founded when?
1987.
Wow, that's a
September.
long time ago.
Yes.
Due to challenges over the last 3 years, the school relocated from Santa Cruz to a small district called Pepper. Why continue in education after all these years?
I just love it. I just love the company of children.
Really?
Yes, I love the company of children. Whenever I'm not at school, I feel like something is missing. You know, it's fun and it's a pleasure to have the children around me in the days. Sometimes you see them jump all in my lap and hug me up. They rip off my stocking, they pull my earring. You have to love it. You have to be dedicated.